So feel free to open your eyes, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. When you open your eyes, you're going to see an Indonesian old man in a kilt. So you might want to keep it closed. There's lots and lots of things that we think ought to be a certain way. And I want to tell you that you might think that I'm wearing a kilt because it's almost St. Patrick's Day. And that would be the conventional wisdom. But I want to tell you that kilts are like sarongs. They don't come from Ireland. In fact, Irish people don't really wear the plaid and the kilt, and that's really Scottish. But Scottish and Welsh and parts of Britain and even parts of Germany and France are part of what's called Indo-Europe. And if you go to Ireland, you will see that a kilt is a large saffron cloth that has been pleated and is worn around. Why? Because it gets cold. And that was the cloak, and that was the blanket, and it was a very practical piece of equipment. What we see today, this thing here, this is an imitation of a Roman skirt. And the pleats are plates that look like the plates of leather that warriors wore, Roman warriors. Because at one time, Rome had conquered Britain. And that Britain was the western edge of the Roman Empire, and Anatolia being the other edge. That edge grew and shrank over hundreds of years, even thousands of years if you think about it. In many, many ways, the things that we think we know about everything are not only changeable, but some of it's just simply not true. So if you go to Ireland and you'll see that their kilts, and you'll see the military still does this, they don't have plaids or tartans. They have saffron. All of them wear these things or a long cape, and it's saffron. Why? Because it's from India. And when you say Indo-Europe, at one time the Keltoi came all across Europe and into Ireland, into England, and it was their fashion to walk around with everything they needed. And so this was their blanket, this was their coat, this was their pillow, this was their, it was everything. And so today, we wear green, but the Irish didn't wear green. We wear plaid, but they didn't wear plaid. They do now. They do now because of popular culture, and they do now to make Americans happy. But the idea of clans and the idea of saffron robes is Indo. It's so Indo that my ancestors from Indonesia, when the Hindus went south, we also wear the saffron robes. Now we went and decorated them. So batik, and if you look at Indonesian batik, it's a saffron robe, but it's very, very, very decorated. But we wear it the same way. And so when I put on my sarong, I will pleat it in the same way that the Irish do. I will put a pleat a series of pleats over here, and I will wear it like a long skirt, and I will also wear it over my shoulder by pleating the first 6 feet of it, and then wear it across. And if you look, I will also wear a belt, and I will also wear a knife right here. And I also will wear, this is called a sporan. But Indonesians and Indo-Europeans are very, very, very similar. Why? Because we're related. At one time, the world was much, much more related than we imagine that it is today. What happened? I think one of the things that happened is wisdom. I was going to talk today about a little bit more of an esoteric look at the rainbow and talk about chakras and talk about, but I think that something changed as I was talking to Ray actually, and we started talking about the rainbow. And if you look up here, you see this very esoteric, weird drawing, and this is the inside of a cave that is a temple that was destroyed by the revolutions in Chiapas, thousands of years old. And it's the depiction of, they thought was a man, but it's actually a woman who represents all of the ages of mankind, which is actually womankind. And so if you look at the pyramid there, you'll see that there are 7 steps to this pyramid, and that this figure is squatted inside of the pyramid. And this is an image that I first saw at the top of Partington Ridge in Big Sur, California. And I was sitting in a hot tub at Esalen in Big Sur, California, and I was talking to people who were famous people that you might know if you are like in the spiritual world, and this happened all of the time there. But at this point, I was sitting there talking to somebody, and there was this young blonde surfer sitting next to me and listening intently as we talked about the Mayan Tarot, something that I'd been involved in for many, many, many years by that time, and that is the Mayan idea of divination. And I was talking to a man who was a Hindu teacher, but he was a Tibetan. And so he was a Tibetan Buddhist, and we started talking about how my tarot system was based upon the chakra system. And at the Mayans had the chakras, just like the Hindus had the chakras, just like the Tibetans had the chakras. And now later in my life, I find out that the Yoruba also have the chakra systems. And the Mayan called it chokla. And even though they are thousands of years and thousands of miles apart, if you look in both cultures, you will find that they have the same stories. The Tower of Tea and the Tower of Babel and the Tower and the Tarot Tower, all of the tower stories are the same. When you look at the relationship between the length, the width, and the depth of the kind of giant bricks or stones used to build the great pyramids, whether it be in Tibet or in the Hindu world, or in the Mayan world, they are the same ratio. Of course, the word Maya in India has just as much veneration as the word Maya does in the Mayan. And it refers to the Great Mother. So all of these things, we were talking about how it was universal. And after we got out, the young surfer says, "Hey, do you want to see a Mayan temple?" And I said, "Of course." And wondering where he was, he says, "Well, give me a ride up to where I live." So in Big Sur, there's a place called Partington Ridge, and it is this long, winding ridge road that goes up, and it looks over the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. Very, very, very rustic and beautiful place, and a winding road built so close to the mountainside that if another car is coming down the road and you two meet, one of you has to back down to the nearest place where you can pull to the side of the road without falling down hundreds of feet into a ravine. And so if you're lucky, you can make it all the way to the top. And this day we were lucky, we made it all the way to the top. And as we go up there, we passed Henry Miller's house, we passed Emma Goldman's house, we passed the house of many, many, many famous people. But way at the top was the house of a man named Jaime D'angelo. Jaime D'angelo probably is not known to most of you, but he was the first ethnomusicologist in the Americas. He was a Spanish doctor, medical doctor, who lived with the natives from Argentina all the way up to Alaska. And he recorded their music and he recorded their languages. He created his own musical notation system, and he is the father of modern American anthropology. He's also crazy, and he left Berkeley because the students showed up one day and he was at the top of a flagpole singing naked. And so they fired him, and they gave him a severance package, and he went into the mountains in Big Sur, and he built a cement dome to wait for the prophecies for the end of time. And while he was there, he attracted the most amazing people who all came. If you read Henry Miller's Big Sur and the Oranges of Hieronymus Bosch, you'll see he writes about Jaime D'angelo. But so do other people. And so at this little tiny place at the top of this hill, was where this young surfer lived in a trailer. And he had lived there all his life. Turns out that his father was Giles Healy. And Giles Healy was a famous photographer for Life magazine. But what he's most famous for, he was a wartime photographer. What he's most famous for was he discovered the Bonampak temples. And all of these amazing, amazing Mexican and Central American temples that was in this certain area where he went to photograph the war, that still rages to this day. He took pictures of this. Now, it turns out that the divination that I do, the tarot that I do, is based upon these temples. But what this young man showed me was something that he had never shown anybody before. It belonged to his grandfather, who he was named after, and it was essentially a wall that had this image on it, and also another wall that had, it looked like a dartboard, just concentric circles, and 7 dots. Turned out that it was a calendar. The Mayan have many, 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 many calendars, and this particular calendar was about the changes of time. And it was based upon the human body as a calendar. And so we just got done talking about the chokla, or the chakras, and he wanted me to see this 1,000-year-old depiction of chakras. Many years later, I was able to take this to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, where they had a woman from Chiapas who understood and was there the day that the rebels destroyed this temple. But she was one of the keepers of this. And she explained to me that the image was one of the ancient women. And she kept what they called the wisdom of the stars. So the Mayan are star maiden people, and they believe that they are descended from different constellations, that at different points in human evolution, the people from the stars came to save us. And the Pleiades and Sirius are two of those constellations. But here, she showed me that the wisdom of all of these times were recorded on the human body. And that, how many of you know what chakras are and where they are? I can see you at home, by the way. Essentially, there are perception centers located in the meridian, that's the center of the body, and they represent different types of energy or perception. The Hindu pictured them as different lotuses. The Yoruba pictured them as eyes. They call it Otu, eyes of the body. As Westerners, we think we know everything because we think. That's how we define our existence. In fact, we think, therefore we are. Or whatever your pronoun is. And the idea is that we speak in terms of perception from a specific chakra. You just heard me say idea. You just heard me say think. You just heard me say believe. These are all mental things. But other cultures believe that perception does not come from the mind. That's just one place that we process it. And we say things all the time like, I have a womb knowledge. I have a gut feeling. My wife says this. She says, I have a head tingles. And I feel like my third eye is feeling scrunchy. And I have a frog in my throat. All of these perception centers are what make up your perception. And my wife and I are writing this book, METAMAGICKA, because people started to understand and wonder how it is we do divination and why it is that we do things differently. And one of them is the belief that everybody can do these things. It's just that if you, for instance, learn tea leaf reading, typically you will learn from somebody who says, if you see a frog in your tea leaf, it means this. If you see, these are all mental constructs that aren't true. If you look inside of your tea leaf cup and you see a frog, it does not mean spring is coming, just because you read it in the glossary of a book. We are people of the book. We believe in dogma. We believe that there has to be a dictionary. We believe that there has to be a rule. But all over the world, where tea leaf reading, tasseomancy or javamancy, where we come from, where we read coffee, when you see a symbol, it means whatever it means. And it's based upon your history and your perception, and all of these things are different. So we're writing this idea in this book, and one of the things that we're running into is that no matter how liberal you think you are, no matter how free you think you are controlled by dogma. And much dogma that we have are because we believe that certain things are facts. We talk about wisdom, as if they are immutable things that people far smarter than us have come up with. And they control our perceptions. And as long as we believe that these facts that we are told are true, then we are unable to change our minds, change our hearts, change our souls, or use the chakras that we've been given to perceive things the way they really are in this moment for us individually. Because that is what we believe is true wisdom, true knowledge. Who you are, what works for you in that moment, and that is not immutable. The word wisdom comes from this idea that there are the wise, right? But wise, the word wise is, if you're Germanic, like for instance, I speak Dutch. I grew up speaking Dutch, and we say wees, right? Wees is wisdom. Wees it means, but what it means is means the way. It's like the Jauw. It was not necessarily one thing. But when you add the word dom at the end of it, so you have weesdom, you have the suffix that means judgment. But not just judgment. It means the judgment of finality. The word dom is where the word doom comes from. Wisdom means the final answer. And it implies that somebody decided that the question is settled, it's over. Weesdom. In Dutch and in Germany, and in most of the Germanic countries, if you are a heretic, if you do not conform to monotheistic, linear, elderly thinking, conventional wisdom, they have a word for it. So my parents would always say, saying eigen wees. That means his own way. It was thought to be a sin to be eigen wees, which meant that you did not follow conventional wisdom. What does that mean? Well, conventional wisdom means that somewhere somebody or somebodies convened and decided what was right, what was true, what was real, what was actual. And we call this wisdom. But what if that's not true? What if conventional wisdom is not true and it's not conventional? I mean, what if your English teacher was wrong and there wasn't a group somewhere that decided what was the language and what was grammatically correct and what was... I mean, have you ever written something really meaningful to you or really political on your Facebook page? Because you probably know I do. And somebody said, that's not how you spell your. There's this idea that by correcting you with rules, that they can police you by making you seem stupid and making the meaning and the subject of what you're saying go away because you're eigen wees, because you have your own way, because you do not follow conventional wisdom. What does this have to do with rainbows? Well, if you imagine that every culture that has these 7 areas of perception, and they actually go from 0 to 10 in many cultures, but the ones that are closest to our physical body, we understand almost always they are identified as red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. First chakra red, 7th chakra violet. And now they are beginning to tell us that human perception really does follow the colors of the rainbow. Why? Because those are the wavelengths of light. And light is simply energy. And energy and mass are the same thing. They're just different ends of a spectrum. And the perceivable, the seeable, the feelable heat and light energies are seen to us as red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. But if you were able to go beyond that, you would get ultraviolet light. And primitive animals and mammals can go below that. And below their first chakra, they have infrared vision. They see more than we do. And the reason that's important is because intuitively we know that these perception centers are the limits of what we have. And now science is telling us that those limits are becoming unbound. But we won't probably experience a lot of that because we have belief systems of conventional wisdom that stop us from learning new things. I'm going to give you one example that's relevant to why I might wear a kilt today. St. Patrick was not Irish. He was born in Britain, but he was a Roman. But you were told that he was Irish. St. Patrick never chased the snakes or the dragons out of Ireland. There were never snakes in Ireland. He did not chase the Druids out of Ireland. In fact, one of his epithets, one of his saint names is Servant of the Four Druids. And that he was a hero amongst the Celts, and that the Celtic had poems that had been written before he came there that anticipated his coming, and they called him the man who wore a cloak with a hole in it, because his kilt, his cloth, had a cowl inside because he was a priest. Why was he a priest? Well, you've been told that he was kidnapped by pirates as a young man. Turns out that that's not true. Turns out that he was a Roman citizen and his father was a decurion. So you've heard of centurions? Centurions rule, I think, 100 units or troops, whatever. A decurion rules 10. And if you are the son, a military son of one, you are expected to move up and become a part of your community, and you're expected to serve and essentially become an officer. And what we believe now is true because of letters that we have found in Britain, where St. Patrick is from, is that he actually ran away from home. And these weren't pirates that kidnapped him. He ran away to Ireland to get away from Rome. And he became a simple shepherd. And the rumor that you heard that they had to pay a king's ransom to bring him back also turns out not to be true. It turns out that his parents had to pay money to the church to allow him to come back to Britain and not be arrested. And in settlement of the crime he had committed by not serving his time, is that he basically went AWOL, he agreed to become a priest. And that's how he becomes a priest. He becomes indentured to the Catholic Church, and because he now speaks the language of the Irish people, and he fell in love with the people, he goes back to convert them. There's only 2 writings that we have from Patrick, and one of them we see that he has actually what we might call gone native, and that he does still, as many Catholic priests have done over 1,000 years, practice the celebrations and the festivals of the people of where he is. My point is that all of the things that you've been told simply aren't true. Nobody in Ireland wears green on St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's isn't even a real saint. The Catholic Church does not and has never recognized St. Patrick. As Americans, we rely on history and other people. We talk about our founding fathers and their wisdom. And we don't understand that these people that we hold in high esteem, that when we look at the reality of who they are, that they aren't necessarily as wise as we want them to be. We believe in things that have to do with freedom, and yet these men owned slaves. These men did not believe that women had the right to vote. These men believed that black people were 3/5 of a human being. We also believe things that relate us to our own feelings of superiority over other people because we are Christian or because we are white. Many of the founding fathers were outright atheists. They were men of the Enlightenment. Thomas Jefferson famously was the first person to translate the Quran in the United States. The opposite of wisdom is something that's inside of us. The opposite of conventional is inventional. Did you know that up until around the time of Galileo, the word invention, the Latin word and the Italian word for that, was thought to be a sin? So it was thought to be heretical to be an inventor. It was thought to be heretical to have free thought. So when you now think of being inventive, that was thought to be sinful. Just like being a creator of something was thought to be sinful. Artists were sinners, they were heretics. It is only in the last few hundred years that the idea that something comes from inside of you has any value or has as much value as what you've been taught makes any amount of difference. One of the myths of St. Patrick's Day is that at the end of the rainbow, there is a pot of gold. And it is said that this was guarded by or hidden by the leprechauns. And if you dig into history, you find that, first of all, that the perception of that was based upon sort of a joke, is that when the Vikings raided, one of the places that they hid their gold was in Ireland. And people tried to find it. And so the story goes that these two people, this couple, was so obsessed with finding the gold that they went and they paid a leprechaun to show them where it was. And he told them that it was at the end of the rainbow. And it's a metaphor for you'll never find it. because you'll never get to the end of the rainbow. But before that idea was brought about by Christianity, the idea of the rainbow amongst the Irish people was not about chasing and trying to find the end of the rainbow. It was based upon the idea that from wherever you are, if you could see where the rainbow landed, that would tell you prophetically where you needed to be. And so even though as you moved, the rainbow would move, that place you saw would still be where it was. And it was thought of as a way to perceive where you need to be. Their metaphor was different. Their wisdom around that was different. As was the idea of leprechauns. So in the last 10 years, Cambridge University has taken all of the written word from the British Isles and started to digitize them and started to look at where words are found and how they're spelled. And one of the words that they've analyzed is leprechaun. And they find that after the 5th century, the word lupercan appears over and over and over and over again, and always in relationship to the Catholic Church. But before, the word lucor appears. Even within the Catholic Church's ideas of what the local people were talking about. Well, lucor means little corpse. It means little person. Lupercan means something else. Why? Because it was the Romans that came that brought their story of the Luperci or the Luperci. So today's the Ides of March, and friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. You all did recall that thrice on the Lupercal. Okay, so it's March 15th, over back on February 15th, because we talked about this last February, right? The Lupercal was going, and young men were running around whipping women to make them pregnant, and that's how they believed it was done back then. But they were enacting ancient pagan rites that were about the people who were half human and half wolf. And the Roman government allowed this because Remus and Romulus were the founders of Rome, and in order for them to hold power, they had to relate themselves to these ancient animistic beliefs. And so we find that the word leprechaun or lupercan comes from the Catholic priests from Italy into Ireland. So leprechauns as little people who do what we think they do because that's an Irish thing, a lot of it comes from Rome. A lot of it comes from the Anglo-Saxon people, and that the stories of the lutin and the leprechaun, the lutin in France, are the same as in Ireland. So much of what we think is true is not true. And so what is it that we can do to find out what's true or not true? If you had asked me a year ago, I probably would have told you that more science and more skepticism and more thinking is what we need to do. But there isn't a single person listening to the sound of my voice anywhere around the world who thinks that normal is normal, who thinks that normal is even achievable anymore, whose definitions of what is right or wrong or possible is the same as it was 1 year ago. And this might put us into a great state of chaos, or it may put us into a great state of opportunity. The Renaissance happened after the plague. What we know of the world in terms of physics, in terms of quantum physics, in terms of physics reality, in terms of things that have to do with things that we didn't believe or understand or even know they existed, all happened after the Spanish flu of 1912. Our perceptions of this country as a government, instead of as the European Union has different countries or states, well, that's what the United States used to be too. Our perception of all of us as one nation happened because of the Civil War and also because of the smallpox. I ask you to consider unconventional wisdom. I ask you to find what impels you and not what compels you. I ask you to find through your own perceptions what it is that is your truth, your reality, your wisdom, your own way. And that one of the things that distinguishes the unity and the congregational movement from all other Christian religious movements is this idea that you have a direct nexus with inside of yourself to whatever it is you believe is divine. And so, namaste. I thank you so much for your attention, and do something unconventional. Put on a kilt. Thank you.